Canada is in shock. An airline disaster has left 63 Canadians dead. All this as U.S.-Iran conflict has entered a deadly new phase. The plane taking off from Tehran Airport and carrying 176 people crashed to the ground, killing all on board, including 63 Canadians.
The Iranian community in general, they're devastated here. I mean, that's about 1% of all of Edmonton's Iranian community was on that flight.
A shocking loss of life for Canada. Families like Edmonton's Mousavi family, many traveling to see extended family, others were students, and the tragedy has our government working for answers and a way to help the grief. The plane crashed, leaving Tehran just hours after Iran launched missiles into an Iraqi military base housing U.S. soldiers. Of course, all this comes on the heels of the U.S. attack that killed General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top military commander in Baghdad, a man known as Iran's most powerful military man. President Donald Trump declaring to the world the reality underway.
Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed.
Reaction to the American-Iran crisis is at the highest levels of engagement, while Canada is focused on recovery of the plane disaster in Tehran. The plane, a Boeing 737 with Ukraine International Airlines, burst into flames just minutes after takeoff in Tehran. The flight was en route to Kiev, where many passengers were likely connecting to other destinations. We'll bring you more on this story of the Canadian loss of life next week, when Context takes a look at Canadians caring for each other in the wake of the plane crash and in the growing tensions between the United States and Iran. 2020 has begun on a somber note for Canada, for the world. Next week, we make sense of the fear and escalation and speak with peacemakers and those helping the Canadian families in grief. For now, we return to our regular program plan for this week, Children in Foster Care. Canada's foster care is a system in dire need of change.
We will not raise children as a children's aid society. We want children to be raised in their families.
My mom's common law partner, he murdered my mom and grandmother, tried to kill me, and then took his own life.
We were placed in separate foster homes, which was even worse because we needed each other.
Families investigated on a whim, children too quickly apprehended, only to end up in long-term government care affecting their entire lives. Plus, we look at our Indigenous communities with an inordinate number of kids caught in child welfare and what's being done about it. Today on Context, improving foster care one child and foster family at a time. Journey to Zero is focused on preventing kids from having to go into the system by intervening early to keep the family unit together as soon as possible, not tearing it apart. It's a new program created by the Children's Aid Society in Toronto. Context producer Hannah Vanderkoy has more.
We understand that families experience crisis and that we may have to remove children, but we should see that as a crisis and that should be temporary. We know that incidents of mental health and poverty and just a number of problems that our city experiences are going up, and they're everything from problems that have always existed like mental health and poverty to very serious problems like crime and gun violence and human trafficking and kids being homeless. And so, you know, we know that the problems aren't diminishing, but we want to respond to them differently in terms of investing in families and investing in family systems rather than removing children from their system. We will not raise children. So one of the things that child welfare has done, and I think not intentionally, is try to provide safety for children, but through a model of removal from their family and then raising them in a foster care system. And we know that the outcomes for those children are very poor. So they have poor educational outcomes, they have poor employment outcomes, and poor mental health outcomes. So we know that kids that grow up, as we say, in care, don't do very well. And our commitment is that we will not raise children as a children's aid society. We want children to be raised in their families and in their communities and in their own systems rather than in our system.
Okay, here with us now is Anna Amy Ho, who says that program, Journey to Zero, would have helped her and her brother when they were put into the child welfare system after witnessing her mother and grandmother's murders. Amy, take us back to that time.
Well, when I was 13, on my graded graduation day, my mom's common law partner, who's been very abusive towards our family for many, many years, he murdered my mom and grandmother, tried to kill me, and then took his own life.
Unspeakable, and we read those terrible types of headlines, but you lived it, and you needed the foster system. How did it help you? How did it hurt you?
Yeah, I can honestly say that I probably wouldn't have survived and made it to where I am today without Children's Day Society, but they weren't perfect. My brother just turned 18 about 10 days after my family was murdered, and he became my guardian. Unfortunately, 18 years old, I don't think anybody at that age knows how to be a parent.
No.
And he didn't get a lot of supports in terms of, how to parent, how to care for a teenager, financial support, mental health support. And so unfortunately for him, the grief, the trauma became really overwhelming, and he just couldn't keep up with his own life.
He's 18 years old, and you've witnessed this horrible murder. You did stick together. You did make it through. What helped you?
We stuck together for about a year, and then eventually I moved out on my own. And I think I would describe the catalyst and the key to my success as having actually my partner and fiance, who was a constant figure in my life, actually just, hours after my family was murdered. And my friends, parents, school guidance counselors, and teachers. My support was quite fragmented, so it wasn't necessarily, always one person, but they were all there at different key moments in my life that really helped me see that I do have a future and that there is hope, despite my past and what I've been through.
Okay, you are speaking so strongly to us about stick with traumatized people, right? Be the neighbor, be the mom who steps in, be ever so present. Does the foster system have enough doorways open for that kind of caregiving?
Actually, traditionally and historically speaking, young people in care will tell you that when their teachers or their friends, parents, or neighbors try to step in and help them, sometimes Children's Day Society, due to fear of liability and concern for that child's safety, they would actually push away those type of supports and try to keep that child away from a harm. But that wasn't the right approach, because I think, any child in or out of care needs that community support and that network. And so with the Journey to Zero program that you had mentioned earlier, that's what they're aiming to do, is switching from being, investigative of families and protecting children from their families, are now helping and supporting families to protect their own children.
That's a beautiful reminder for us to stick close, even though there's red tape, stick close, because kids need it. I just got to close with this. It's a little off topic, but you've used art to heal yourself in a beautiful way, and your life has been this swing from one bar to another, like your acrobatic, beautiful art that you do here. I think we've got some gorgeous footage of you. What has it meant to heal through the arts for you?
Yeah, for me, talk therapy and talking to a therapist was not necessarily the most powerful thing for me growing up as a young kid in care. And so I was very, very blessed and fortunate to have found dance at a young age, even when my mom was still alive. And I really believe in the power of healing through mind, body, and spirit. And fortunately for me, I fell into circus and dance, and it's I'm a huge dance movement psychotherapist, or psychotherapy enthusiast, and I just can see through my own experience and through others and other victims that I've worked with who've experienced trauma, how powerful movement and music and dance really is to heal. So I'm very fortunate to turn something from my passion to a hobby to then something that I do actually as a profession. I also perform a bit on the side as well.
You're full-time in public speaking and advocacy work. Book her for an event that you may need. Anna Amy Ho, thank you for joining us and sharing your incredible journey with us. You're an inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna.
Well, Jennifer Clark is a former foster care child. She spoke with Context producer Faten Alfaraj about her journey through a troubled childhood and a broken child welfare system.
I had no idea that, this was going to be the night that kind of changed the entire course of my life. Chris and I were screaming and crying. We want our mother, and we weren't allowed to be with her. No matter how hard we screamed or how hard we cried, everybody just disappeared before us. And then we were placed in separate foster homes, which was even worse because we needed each other. So they took my brother to one, and I had no idea where he went or where he was or how he was. And they took me to a foster home, and it was an awful experience. I just remember like the foster mom, not being at all exuding anything of love or care or comfort, nothing of the sorts. And so I was in this foster room, and I would call my mom at night, and she'd kind of be like out of it and, marble-mouthed and probably taking pills and that type sort of thing. And I remember like getting off the phone with her and acting like everything was okay and going to my room and crying because I knew that if I said something then, I wasn't going to be allowed to go back to live with her. And I just kept, like crying and saying like, that's all I want. That's all I want. Like, I just want my mom. I want my family. I want my brother. They call them foster homes, but like they don't always necessarily feel like homes. And often it's like you're in homes with people that already have their own children. And it's just always has this kind of feeling of being like second best. There were foster parents that were definitely unhealthy themselves and therefore like not present in the way that they should have been. And, exemplifying behaviors that were maybe not even that far from that of my own family. I've been in foster homes where there's locks on the pantries and the kitchens because kids take food when they're not supposed to. I had never been in a place for one full year. And so even in the foster homes that I did stay longer stays, like it was never for a full year. And I was a very disobedient person. Like everything that would have been important to me was already taken from me. So I had no sense of consequence. Like, what could you take from me? I didn't have a home, I didn't have a family, like bring it on type sort of thing was my attitude of life. And like I entered high school and like I said, I did like decently well at first and then met, the type of people who like to smoke pot and drink and, party and this type sort of thing. And so like, yeah, it didn't take me very long to kind of go down that road. When you're 21, extended care and maintenance, your finances are cut off. And that kind of led me back into drugs, and I lost my job at the rehab that I was working at, and I didn't finish my high school. I ended up back in jail again. And I literally just said to God at this point, I was like, like if you say that you're the savior, then you can save me. That was like my challenge to God. Shortly thereafter, I ended up at the girls' home. There was so much love there. And here I was trying to move forward. Like, I got sober and I was going to church and I was working at the rehab that I had went through. I was trying to finish my high school. Like I was doing all these positive things and I wasn't rejected. And it was like, that's God's love. Like that's his acceptance. From that moment forward, like even through all the bumps and grinds and like, it's not like my life was perfect after that. But what didn't change was God's love for me. Now my life is very different. I love it.
More than twice as many Indigenous children are in foster care than any other part of the Canadian demographic. We've got to do something about it. Three powerful women to advocate for their people: Susan Levi-Peters in Elsie Pogtog in New Brunswick, Stephanie Joyce Stiers, who works with youth on Six Nations in Ontario, and Crystal Lavallee, our producer of First People's Voices, which is here on Yes TV. Thank you all. Elsie, let's go to you first. What needs to happen for the crisis in foster care in First Nations?
Well, we need to bring our children home. That's the first thing. The other thing that needs to happen is to provide the adequate financial assistance to single mothers and adequate housing on reserve, because a lot of these children that are in foster care are in care because the mother cannot afford to take care of them. Because and I can only speak in Ilsabuk. What's happened is our welfare rates have not gone up for over 30 years. So if a mother is a single mother or anything like that, they're using the same rates like 35 years ago. So they cannot afford their kids to to feed, clothe, and shelter their kids. And then the lack of housing that we face on reserve needs to be fixed, because a lot of these kids are taken away because there's no adequate housing for the mother and the children. And in Elsipogtog alone, we need $8 million just to do housing repairs to have adequate living conditions.
Are one of those reserves there in New Brunswick where the housing is grossly inadequate. Let's move to Ontario. Stephanie, it is a shocking reality that there are more in foster care now than there were at the height of the residential schools. What is that doing for the fabric of your families?
Well, actually, it's tearing down the families. And I don't know if you know about the court case where we have Dr. Cindy Barberstock from the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. And she was advocating for these children because of deaths that are happening off reserve, where governments, the provincial and the federal government, are fighting because they don't know who's going to pay the bill. So our children are dying. And Cindy Blackstock, she stood up and she went to bat for our youth. And now there's a court case where the government, the federal government, is trying to stall paying those funds out to families.
And a new law that must be put in place.
Exactly.
It is getting, and we are hearing Chief Bellegarde say there hasn't been enough consultation. Crystal, you work with the young people. You're an advocate. You travel with a tribe, if I may say, of beautiful kids that are just so keen that it's going to be different. What are they hoping to see happen with the need over foster care?
You know, I think, you know, where the government, provincial, federal, we kind of pick up the slack by going in with resources. We go in with programs that promote hope, because they said the #1 way to combat, you know, suicide, which a lot of those kids face when you're in the foster care system, there's neglect, there's abuse, and so there's this epidemic of hopelessness. So when we go in, we promote hope and resiliency, and we are seeing kids gravitate toward it, because the message that's being sent to those kids is that they're not loved, but we're going in saying, you know what, you are loved and you are valuable.
And, you know, I see that happen all over the storytelling that's gone through First People's Voices and yours. As mothers, you are so deeply passionate. What do we need to do first to repair? Stephanie?
I think that getting back to our language and our culture and having that in our families, and that empowers and tells us who we are as a people. And that's empowering to us. That was ripped away through residential school. And now it's time for people in society to stand up and say, guess what? I need to find out about our Indigenous people. I need to find out about our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And what can we do to help them to grow and expand and to move forward, right? Because it's been atrocities through failed government policy that has led us to where we are today, and also who we are as a people. And we need to get back to our ways, because our ways are the ways that empower us. Our language, our culture, it's all teaching, it's all empowering, and then you move in peace, power, and righteousness, because through that you get power. Through that you gain peace, and then you move out in righteousness.
Okay, well, it's going to be a very interesting quarter in Parliament, as this is front and center on the new child welfare law for Indigenous peoples. Thank you all for contributing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, frontline workers help families in need of care and support when there is nowhere for them to turn. And also ahead, it's called aging out of the child welfare system. You turn 18 and you're on your own. One woman is working to change that antiquated part of the foster care system. So what happens when a foster child raised within the system has to leave at 18? That's called aging out, and Jane Kovakarva knows all about it. Jane, thank you for being with us. It is a brutal bounce from foster care to independence. What was it like for you?
Yeah, you fear your 18th birthday. right, typically. In my case, I chose to leave 2 years earlier even because I thought foster care was quite enough for me.
And financially, what are you left with? You're at 16 and you're saying, I'm done with foster care.
Yes, so they do in Ontario provide you with an allowance. When I aged out, it was $663, which you had to get pretty creative to support yourself on that. Today it is a little bit more. It's in the $875 range from what I understand.
So what happens down the road? You're an amazing success story. You are a miracle. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But what are the statistics that you are fighting against? What are the consequences?
Yeah. So I actually did a research project that looked at the last 40 years of academic studies, and it looked at youth outcomes after care, and it included jurisdictions in Canada, US, Australia, UK, you name it. And to a percentage point, the outcomes are dismal. So a lot of kids face criminal justice system involvement, early parenthood, poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, you name it. There's a lot of challenges after care, but it doesn't have to be that way.
It wasn't that way for you. You, your story is amazing, including a biological grandpa who paid your university tuition. What do we need to be doing?
Yeah, so it wasn't that way for me when you look back on it now, right? Because you can see I've had some success. But also when I left at 16, I was terrified. I certainly lived in poverty for many years and had housing instability. I moved apartments probably every year. And it was just hard. I dropped out of high school too. Something like 60% of foster kids drop out of high school. So I was lucky because I did find my way back to post-secondary.
You have an MBA from the London School of Economics. You certainly did.
It's a master's in human rights. Yeah, I do.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But you are, and you're now saying we cannot let this happen to other kids like almost could have happened to you.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do?
Okay, well, what we need to do is we need to support them for success in their adult lives. And that includes especially channeling them towards post-secondary studies instead of welfare. For example, when I was 21 and about to lose my $600 allowance, I was encouraged to go on to welfare. I didn't even qualify for welfare at the time because I bought my first house at 19, right?
Which was amazing because you worked hard, just a 9-to-5 type job.
Yeah, I worked hard and I was able to share my resources with a partner, and he worked hard too. And then I was lucky because tuition wasn't coming out of pocket. So today what I'm working on is getting tuition waived for anybody who's been raised in care without age restriction.
You've had your first faith-based university, King's College, part of Western University, going to waive that.
That's right.
Many more. If someone is aging out, do they get in touch with you? How do we make sure that this kind of success story continues?
Yeah, actually I encourage anybody who's an ally or anybody who's lived in care to reach out to the Child Welfare Political Action Committee Canada. It's an organization that I run, and what we do is we target politicians so that we have proper legislation and policy that supports youth success after care.
Child Welfare PAC, a very political group making a difference. Thank you so much, Jane. Yeah, you can get in touch with Jane through our website. We've got her contact information there. Way to go for being a great story of hope on aging out and reminding us all they need opportunities for post-secondary education. Thank you.
Thank you for shining a light on this important topic.
Thank you.
Still ahead, when a family is in deep crisis mode, their options can be limited. One group is working to give families the tools they need to survive against the odds.
Well, the best solution is making the family strong enough to keep kids out of care. Jen Francis of Safe Families knows all about it. Jen, this has been a deep motivation to say we've got to improve families. What is the unique approach that Safe Families takes?
Yeah, so we are really focused on supporting families before the kids end up in foster care and try and keep them out of the system. So what we find is a lot of families are socially isolated today due to the breakdown of the family, migration, and other factors, and so they don't have extended family and friends around them that can support them in raising their children. So when they go through some kind of crisis situation like a medical crisis or something else, job loss. Something that for the rest of us who have a support system we could get through easily enough, they can't, and they often end up with their kids going into foster care.
And you're saying there is like an army of help available in community churches that should figure out how do we step in to those lonely families, those families on the edge. How does that happen?
Yeah, exactly. So through Safe Families, we recruit host families from local churches in different communities in Canada, and we screen them and train them and approve them, and then they will actually host kids in their home. So when a parent's going through a crisis, is in the hospital, needs time to move to a new place, the child can stay with a host family, and they're in a safe, loving environment, and the parent has time to get back on their feet and be ready to have their kids come back.
Has Child and Family Services figured you guys out yet? Because you're an intervention step, right? You are before somebody blows the whistle, a school teacher or someone saying this child is at risk. How have you managed to come alongside in such a loving, protective way and stay out of, I mean, just how does that get navigated?
With the child welfare system?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have relationships with the different children's aid societies, family and children's service agencies in the regions that we work, and we're always actively growing those relationships. So they will actually refer families directly to us, or sometimes we work side by side with them on cases.
So the ideal is stop it before it gets to the gate of government services. Do it actually in a safe neighborhood family.
Yes, exactly.
And why churches? Why look at churches for that base of a safety net?
Well, I think it's really the motivation behind what we do. It comes out of the gospel, which is that because Christ loved us first, he's called us to go and love other people. And a lot of Christians want to do that and are looking for practical ways to do that for folks in the community who don't have help. And so this is, so they're looking for it. And so this is an opportunity that we provide for them to serve in this way.
All right. Well, we're thrilled to see you expanding across communities, across Canada. Jen Francis, the Executive Director of Safe Families. We've got all your contact information on our website. Maybe you can be a safe family. Maybe you can be that buffer before a child and their family gets swept into more government services. They really just need a great family. If it's yours, check out Jen Francis at Safe Families on our website. Jen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorna.
Well, I hope you noticed on the show that 3 of our guests who were long-term kids in the foster care system were now standing here as advocates. What made their success possible? Solid relationships that offered spiritual community, people that stood in the gap with them. How about investing your spiritual strength into people aging out of foster care? We've left the connection to the Child Welfare PAC and to Safe Families all on our website. Let's get involved in a better tomorrow for foster kids. Head to our YouTube channel for a little more of my own experience in foster care, because with God, new beginnings are so possible. That story's on our YouTube channel. So for all of us, I'm Lorna Dueck. Thanks for watching.